My name is Melissa Parker, and 3 weeks ago I stood in my grandmother's gravel driveway while she asked me a question that changed everything. I had just stepped out of an Uber when she looked at me across the crowded foyer and said, "Melissa, sweetheart, why are you arriving in a rideshare? Where's the Lexus your grandfather bought you?" Before I could answer, my mother answered for me. "Oh, Melissa let Ava use it," she said with a polished smile. "Ava needs it more because of the kids. Melissa is always so understanding." That sentence had followed me my entire life. Your sister needs it more. I'm 28 years old. I live in Hartford, Connecticut, in a one-bedroom condo I bought myself after years of brutal hours working as a software engineer at a fintech company. I pay my own bills. I cook for myself most nights. I call my grandmother every week. I visit my parents once or twice a month because that's apparently what good daughters do, even when being around family feels like slowly disappearing in plain sight. My older sister Ava is 30. She's married to Ryan Mitchell, who works finance management at a large dealership outside Danbury. They have 2 children, Lily and Noah. My mother treats Ava like someone fragile and precious, someone whose struggles deserve rescue. She treats me like a woman who can survive anything, so therefore deserves nothing. There's a difference. People think being called independent is a compliment. Sometimes it's just a prettier way of saying nobody plans to protect you. The Lexus had been my grandparents' gift to me on my 24th birthday. My grandfather chose the color before he died, pearl white with cream interior. My grandmother took me to dinner that night at a small historic inn they'd loved for decades. After dessert, she walked me outside and pointed to the SUV sitting beneath the parking lot lights with a red ribbon stretched across the hood. I cried immediately. She handed me the keys without crying herself. Attached to the keyring was a silver engraved tag with my initials carved into it, MP. Then she opened the brown leather binder she carried everywhere after my grandfather passed away and wrote something down. That binder mattered more than I understood at the time. About a week later, during dinner at my parents' house, my mother casually suggested keeping the original title paperwork in the family safe for protection. "Insurance issues happen," she told me while refilling iced tea glasses. "Accidents, theft, paperwork mistakes. We'll keep the original secured here and you can carry a copy." I was 24 and trusting and tired from work. So I said yes. That was my mistake. Ava had always needed something. When I got accepted into college at 19, my mother sold a piece of family property to help pay for Ava's wedding venue. When I graduated, my mother skipped the ceremony because Ava's daughter had a birthday party the same weekend. When I finally paid off my student loans at 26, my mother responded by reminding me Ava was still struggling financially. Every sacrifice somehow made sense in my head because I had spent my whole life doing emotional math for other people. Ava's losses mattered more because she had children. Mine only inconvenienced me. That was the equation in my family for nearly 3 decades. 6 months before my grandmother's 75th birthday party, my mother invited me over for lunch. Just the two of us and my father. Ava wasn't there, which should have warned me something was off immediately. Halfway through lunch, my mother mentioned updating insurance information for the Lexus and asked for confirmation of my legal name, birthday, and registration details. I answered automatically while eating chicken salad and barely paying attention. At the end of the meal, she handed me what she claimed was a copy of the title. I shoved it into my purse without even looking at it. Months later, I would realize the document she gave me was just a photocopy printed on regular office paper. The real title was already gone. 3 weeks before my grandmother's birthday party, I drove to Ava's house carrying a stuffed bear for Lily because I'd missed my niece's birthday due to a major deadline at work. I was driving a rental sedan because my Lexus had supposedly been in extended service for nearly 3 months. The second I pulled into Ava's driveway, I saw my SUV, my license plate, my car, a car seat installed in the back. I remember standing there holding that stuffed bear while Ava turned around with grocery bags in both hands and smiled like nothing unusual was happening. "Oh," she said casually. "Mom didn't tell you we switched vehicles?" I honestly thought she was joking at first. I stared at her across the driveway and said, "What do you mean switched?" Ava adjusted the grocery bags against her hip, like we were discussing weather instead of my vehicle sitting behind her with her daughter's car seat strapped into it. "Mom said you were fine with it," she replied. Ryan handled the paperwork through the dealership. It just made more sense for us right now. Made more sense. I remember hearing my pulse in my ears. The worst part wasn't even the car sitting there. It was how normal everyone else seemed to think this was. Like my life was flexible property that could simply be reassigned whenever my sister wanted something. Ava kept talking casually while walking toward the garage. You barely drive anyway, Melissa. And honestly, this SUV is so much safer for the kids. Safer for the kids. There it was again. The magic phrase that excused everything. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse her of stealing my car. I didn't even step farther into the driveway. My hands were shaking too badly for me to trust myself to speak carefully, and I've learned something about anger over the years. Never make permanent decisions while your hands are shaking. So I handed Lily's birthday bear to Ava, told her I had to go, and drove home in silence. 90 minutes down the highway without music. 90 minutes trying to convince myself there had to be some misunderstanding. That night I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, using that bright professional voice she used with real estate clients. Sweetheart, how's your evening? I skipped everything else. Why is my SUV parked in Ava's driveway? There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough for her to build the answer she wanted. Oh, she said lightly, I meant to tell you earlier. Ava needed it more. You know how difficult things have been for them lately. I tightened my grip on the phone. Mom, that vehicle is legally mine. We already handled the paperwork months ago. No, we didn't. Yes, we did, she replied immediately. You agreed to it at dinner, remember? Ryan processed everything through the dealership. Melissa, don't make this dramatic. My chest felt tight. I never agreed to give Ava my car. My mother sighed the way people sigh when they think someone difficult is embarrassing them. Honey, you live alone. You work constantly. You use Uber half the time anyway. Ava has 2 children. Sometimes families make practical decisions. Practical decisions. I sat there staring at my kitchen wall while she explained my own life to me. Then came the sentence I'd heard in different forms for years. You're the easy one, Melissa. Ava would have completely fallen apart without that SUV. You understand things better than she does. No, what she meant was this. I was easier to disappoint. That conversation ended with my mother warning me not to cause tension at my grandmother's birthday party. You will not ruin your grandmother's celebration over a vehicle, she told me firmly. I hung up without answering. For a long time, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the photocopy of the title I'd pulled from my glove compartment earlier that day. Something felt wrong immediately. The signature at the bottom looked like mine if someone had tried to recreate it from memory. Close, but not correct. The next morning, I called my father while my mother was at church. I could hear wind chimes in the background when he answered. Dad, I asked quietly, did you ever see me sign paperwork transferring the Lexus? Silence. That silence told me everything before he finally spoke. Your mother handled all of it, he said carefully. Did you see me sign anything? Another pause. No. I closed my eyes. My father exhaled heavily into the phone. Melissa, your grandmother has been asking questions. That got my attention immediately. What kind of questions? She asked your mother who processed the transfer. Then she asked for copies of the paperwork. He lowered his voice slightly. Your mother told her you signed everything willingly. Your grandmother got very quiet after that. If you knew my grandmother, you understood how dangerous quiet could become. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't loud. When Eleanor Brooks got quiet, it usually meant she was documenting something. Dad, I asked slowly, is Grandma changing her estate plans? He hesitated again. Your mother thinks so. A strange feeling moved through my chest then. Not relief exactly, but something close to finally realizing I wasn't crazy. After we hung up, I spent almost an hour staring out my apartment window, trying to decide whether I wanted the truth badly enough to uncover it. On Monday morning, I told my coworker Rachel the short version while we stood in the office kitchen during lunch. Rachel used to work as a paralegal before switching into software engineering, which meant she still approached life like every problem left paperwork behind. When I finished explaining, she stared at me over her coffee mug. Melissa, she said carefully, have you checked the DMV records yet? I blinked. What? You can request title transfer information online. If your name was removed from that vehicle, there's a paper trail. I suddenly felt stupid for not thinking of it sooner. It's family, I said weakly. Rachel gave me a look that cut straight through me. That's exactly why you should verify everything. I didn't check the records that day. I told myself I would do it after work, then after dinner, then before bed. Every hour I delayed, because part of me still wanted this to be some giant misunderstanding, instead of exactly what it looked like. Tuesday evening, my grandmother called me. She never texted, never emailed. She simply called around 6 o'clock every evening because she believed important conversations deserved real voices. "Melissa, sweetheart," she said gently, "I wanted to ask you something." I sat down at my kitchen table immediately. "Okay." "Your mother told me you willingly gave the Lexus to Ava." I looked toward the dark window over my sink. There were two possible answers: the honest one and the careful one. "It's complicated," I finally said. My grandmother stayed quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you still have any paperwork related to the vehicle?" "I have the copy Mom gave me." "Good," she replied calmly. "Bring every document you have to my house Saturday." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because your grandfather believed records matter," she said softly. "And I've spent the last 2 years organizing his files." I heard pages shifting on her end of the line. The binder. She was looking through the binder while talking to me. "Grandma," I asked carefully, "are you investigating this?" "No," she answered. "I'm verifying it." There's a difference between those two things. Investigating means you suspect someone may have lied. Verifying means you already believe they did. After we hung up, I sat at my table for nearly 20 minutes without moving. Something had changed. For the first time in my life, someone inside my family wasn't asking me to stay quiet for the sake of peace. Wednesday afternoon, Ava texted me 16 messages in a row, asking if I could pick up expensive table linens for Grandma's birthday party because Ryan needed the Lexus that weekend, and she couldn't easily get out with the kids. Then she ended the entire thing with, "You're the best, Melissa." I stared at the screen so long my phone dimmed. Finally, I called her. "Hey," she answered brightly. "I don't have a car this week," I reminded her. "Oh, just Uber there," she replied instantly. "It's not far." I closed my eyes. "Ava, you're driving my SUV." There was a tiny pause. Then came the sentence again. "I just need it more right now." That sentence did something strange to me the third time I heard it. It stopped hurting. Not because it became acceptable, because suddenly I could finally hear what it really meant. "We matter more than you." That's all it had ever meant. "Ava," I said quietly, "did you know I never signed transfer papers?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I assumed Mom handled everything legally," she answered carefully. Assumed. Not denied. Not shocked. Just careful. Then she lowered her voice. "Please don't make things awkward at Grandma's birthday, okay? She doesn't need stress at her age." My grandmother was 75 years old and still mentally sharper than every adult in this situation combined. But somehow everyone kept talking about her like she was fragile whenever the truth threatened to surface. Thursday evening, my father called me from his office after work. His voice sounded different immediately, more resolved. "Melissa," he said quietly, "you were in Portland on March 14th, correct?" "Yes." "You spoke at a cybersecurity conference?" "Yes." I sat upright slowly. "What's going on?" My father inhaled deeply. "Your mother told the dealership you signed the transfer paperwork in person on March 14th. Ice spread through my chest. "That's impossible." "I know," he replied softly. "Because I still have the flight confirmations you emailed me for tax reimbursement." My entire body went still. He continued carefully. "You flew from Boston to Portland on the morning of the 12th. You checked into the hotel the same day. You spoke on a panel during the afternoon of the 14th. I pressed my hand against my forehead. "Oh my God." "I'm sorry," my father whispered. "I should have paid more attention sooner." I don't think he understood how enormous those words were. My father almost never challenged my mother. Not openly, not directly. But in that moment, he chose facts over loyalty, and I think it cost him something internally to do it. "Dad," I said quietly, "can you send me every record you have?" "Yes." The email arrived 4 minutes later. Flight confirmations, hotel receipts, conference registration, panel schedules, photographs, time-stamped proof that while paperwork claimed I signed vehicle transfer documents inside a Connecticut dealership, I had actually been standing on a stage in Maine discussing API security. I opened my laptop immediately after reading the email. Then I finally checked the DMV records. 10 minutes later, I was staring at the title history for my Lexus. Owner transfer completed March 14th. New registered owner, Ava Mitchell. Processing dealership, North Valley Auto Group. Transfer type, family transfer. I read the page 3 times. Then I looked at my boarding pass, proving I had been over 200 miles away when the signature supposedly happened. That was the moment denial finally died. My mother had forged my name. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother sitting across from me at that lunch table while casually asking for my birthday and legal information, like she was filling out harmless insurance paperwork instead of preparing to steal something from me. By Friday morning, I stopped trying to convince myself this could be solved quietly. I drove the rental sedan to the DMV branch in Wethersfield before work. The woman behind the counter wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and introduced herself as Denise. I asked for 3 things: a certified copy of the original Lexus title, a certified copy of the transfer paperwork filed on March 14th, and the affidavit packet required for reporting forged signatures. Denise printed everything without asking questions. The second she slid the paperwork through the opening beneath the glass window, I knew the signature wasn't mine. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed the differences. I did immediately. My capital M always had sharp angles because my grandfather taught me cursive when I was little and insisted letters should look clean and disciplined. The signature on the transfer form had rounded loops. My driver's license number was also wrong by 2 digits. Someone had copied it carelessly, someone who thought nobody would ever check. I stood there staring at the forged signature while my stomach twisted, not because I couldn't believe it anymore. Because now I could. That was the worst part. Somewhere deep down, this betrayal actually fit the emotional pattern of my family so perfectly that once the evidence existed, it made terrible sense. I paid for the certified copies and left with a thick manila folder tucked under my arm. Then I drove straight to my bank and had the affidavit notarized. I still remember the woman at the desk smiling politely while stamping the documents, completely unaware she was witnessing the collapse of 28 years of forced family loyalty. Friday evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table with 2 folders in front of me. One contained proof, the other contained consequences. My first instinct was to drive directly to my parents' house and force my mother to explain herself in front of my father, but I knew exactly what would happen if I did. She would call Ava first, then my uncle, then 3 cousins. By the time Saturday arrived, she would already have a narrative prepared. Melissa is overreacting. Melissa misunderstood. Melissa is being dramatic over a car. That's what manipulators do when they lose control of facts. They race to control perception instead. So I decided something that changed my life. I decided to say nothing. No confrontation. No warning. No emotional speech. I would attend my grandmother's birthday party exactly as invited. I would answer direct questions honestly, and I would let people expose themselves without interruption. That Friday night, before bed, I opened the drawer beside my nightstand and picked up the silver keychain my grandmother had given me 4 years earlier. MP. My initials reflected softly under the bedroom light. For the first time since discovering the truth, I let myself feel angry. Not loud anger, not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The kind that finally stops volunteering to be sacrificed for everyone else's comfort. Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, my apartment buzzer rang unexpectedly. I checked the camera screen beside the door and froze. My grandmother stood in the hallway holding her brown leather tote bag. I buzzed her upstairs immediately. She walked into my apartment wearing gardening shoes and a gray cardigan, like she was stopping by for casual coffee instead of arriving 90 minutes away from home on the morning of her own birthday party. "I need coffee first," she said calmly. I made it exactly the way she liked it. Cream. No sugar. She sat at my kitchen table while I placed the mug in front of her. Then she folded her hands together and looked directly at me. "Melissa," she said gently, "I'm going to ask you one question, and I need a truthful answer." "Okay. Did you sign paperwork transferring ownership of that Lexus?" "No." She nodded once. Not surprised. Not emotional. Just confirmed. Then she slowly opened the brown leather binder and flipped to a section marked with a numbered tab. I couldn't see the papers inside, but I heard another page slide into place. "I've documented every financial transaction in this family since your grandfather died," she told me quietly. He asked me to continue keeping records because he believed someday it would matter. She closed the binder again. Then she looked at me with complete calm. I want you to trust me today. My throat tightened slightly. What does that mean? It means you won't bring paperwork to the party. You won't confront anyone beforehand. You won't say anything unless directly asked. I stared at her. You already know what happened, don't you? She held my gaze for a few seconds. Yes. There was something terrifyingly steady about her composure. Not rage. Not revenge. Just certainty. She stood and picked up her tote bag. Then she paused beside my apartment door and added one final instruction. Take an Uber to the party. I frowned slightly. Why? Because I need everyone to see you arrive without your vehicle. Then she left. I spent the rest of the afternoon getting ready slowly. Navy dress, pearl earrings, minimal makeup. At 1 o'clock, Ava texted me reminding me about the table linens she'd asked me to pick up. I ignored the message. So did my mother's follow-up texts asking where the linens were. If they wanted linens badly enough, they could drive the Lexus to get them themselves. At 4:30, I ordered an Uber. During the drive north through Connecticut, I stared out the window at the trees and thought about my grandfather. If he'd still been alive, this entire situation would have ended with one furious phone call. But my grandmother was different. She didn't rush. She waited. She documented. And then she acted only when she was completely prepared. Somewhere during that drive, I realized something that made my chest ache. My mother chose favorites. My grandmother chose fairness. And those two things are not remotely the same. My Uber pulled into my grandmother's circular driveway at exactly 5:14 p.m. Cars lined both sides of the gravel entrance. String lights glowed above the backyard tent even though the sun hadn't fully gone down yet. Relatives filled the house so completely I could hear conversations through the open windows before I even stepped out of the car. I thanked the driver, closed the door behind me, and watched the Uber disappear down the road. The second I reached the porch, my cousin Jenna smiled at me. Melissa, where's your Lexus? Long story, I answered quietly. I stepped inside. The foyer buzzed with noise and movement. My aunt was laughing near the staircase. Someone carried trays of appetizers through the dining room. Children were running between adults. And through the front window, parked proudly near the front of the driveway lineup, sat my white Lexus. Ava's daughter's car seat was still visible in the back. Then my mother appeared. She walked toward me immediately in a cream-colored blazer with the kind of smile people wear when they know they're being observed. Sweetheart, she said loudly, you made it. And then my grandmother stepped out of the kitchen. Everything slowed after that. She crossed the foyer carefully, her brown leather tote hanging from one shoulder, and stopped a few feet in front of me, while conversations around us faded naturally into silence. Melissa, darling, she asked clearly, why are you arriving in an Uber? What happened to the Lexus your grandfather bought for you? The room froze. Before I could speak, my mother stepped forward smoothly. Oh, Mom, she laughed lightly, waving one hand dismissively. Melissa let Ava have the SUV. Ava needs it more with the children, and Melissa understood completely. There it was again. Needed it more. 40 people heard it this time. My grandmother never looked at my mother. She looked directly at me. Is that what happened, Melissa? My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. But my voice came out calm. No, Grandma. The air in the foyer changed instantly. My mother's smile tightened. Melissa, she said warningly, don't do this here. My grandmother still didn't look at her. Melissa, she repeated gently, did you willingly give your sister that vehicle? No. Silence. Absolute silence. I saw my uncle slowly lower his wine glass. My cousin stopped bouncing a toddler on her hip. Even the caterer standing near the dining room doorway froze. My sister appeared beside my mother then, face already tense. Melissa, she whispered sharply. I didn't look at her. I only looked at my grandmother. She nodded once slowly, like someone confirming a calculation she'd already solved. Then she turned toward Ava. Ava, sweetheart, may I have the keys to the Lexus? Ava immediately looked at my mother. My mother didn't answer. Ryan stepped in instead. Of course, he said carefully, pulling the keys from his pocket. The silver keychain caught the chandelier light the second my grandmother took it from him. She slipped the keys directly into her cardigan pocket without even glancing at them. Then she looked at Ryan calmly. You process vehicle transfers at North Valley Auto Group, correct? Ryan swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Did your dealership process the transfer of Melissa's Lexus? He hesitated. Yes. My mother jumped in immediately. Mom, this is ridiculous. It's a birthday party. My grandmother ignored her entirely. Ryan, she continued calmly, did you personally verify Melissa's identity during the transfer process? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Well, Diane brought the paperwork in. We process family transfers all the time. Did you personally verify Melissa's identity? His face changed then, because suddenly he understood this wasn't family tension anymore. This was legal language. No, he admitted quietly. The room somehow became even quieter. My mother stepped forward quickly. Mom, please, she said through clenched teeth. You're embarrassing everyone. My grandmother finally looked at her. No, she replied softly. You did that already. Then she reached into the brown tote and pulled out the leather binder. The sound it made landing on the foyer table echoed through the room. My mother visibly paled. I think that was the exact moment she realized how serious this had become. I spoke for the first time since saying no. Mom, I said quietly, I never signed anything. My mother turned toward me instantly with forced patience painted across her face. Yes, you did, she insisted. Melissa, you probably don't remember because you're always exhausted from work. When did I sign it? Her eyes flickered. In March. What day? Another pause. Around the middle of March. I nodded slowly. Interesting, I said, because I was speaking at a cybersecurity conference in Portland, Maine on March 14th. I have airline records, conference registration, hotel receipts, and panel photographs proving I wasn't even in Connecticut. The smile vanished from my mother's eyes completely. Across the foyer, Ava stared at the floor. Ryan looked physically sick. I continued calmly. The dealership paperwork says I signed the transfer in person that same afternoon. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And for the first time in my life, my mother looked afraid of me instead of disappointed in me. My grandmother rested one hand on top of the leather binder. Then she opened it. My grandmother flipped carefully to a tab already marked with a pale yellow divider. Then she removed two documents from the binder and held them side by side for the entire foyer to see. In her right hand was the certified copy of the original Lexus title issued 4 years earlier, with my name listed as sole owner. In her left hand was the transfer paperwork filed in March showing Ava as the new owner. She held both papers perfectly steady. Diane, she said calmly to my mother, these signatures are not the same. My mother didn't answer. Look at the M. Nobody in the room moved. My grandmother stepped closer and pointed directly at the signatures. Melissa's capital M has sharp corners, she said quietly. This one has rounded loops. My mother's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The silence became unbearable. Finally, she tried to recover. Mom, I had authority, she said quickly. Melissa is my daughter. You do not have legal authority over an adult woman, my grandmother replied immediately. You lost that when she turned 18. My mother's eyes filled with tears then, but I knew that performance too well. I had watched her cry at school events, open houses, and family arguments whenever she needed sympathy to redirect attention away from herself. I only did this for Ava, she whispered. She has children. She's struggling. That is not an explanation for forgery. My grandmother never raised her voice once. That somehow made everything worse. Ava finally spoke, barely above a whisper. Grandma, I didn't know she forged anything. My grandmother looked at her carefully. Did you know the vehicle belonged to your sister? Ava's eyes dropped again. Yes. Did you ask Melissa directly whether she agreed to transfer it? A long pause. No. My grandmother nodded slowly like she'd expected exactly that answer. Ryan suddenly pulled his phone from his pocket. I need to call my manager, he muttered. You probably should, my grandmother replied calmly. He walked outside without another word. The screen door slammed behind him. My mother looked around the room desperately then, like she was searching for someone to rescue her. Nobody moved. Not my uncle, not my cousins, not even my father. That shook me more than anything else, because for the first time in my life, nobody rushed to help my mother control the story. My grandmother closed the binder carefully and rested both hands on top of it. Then she spoke to the room. I had hoped to address this privately, she said. But since my daughter publicly announced Melissa's supposed generosity tonight, we will correct the lie publicly as well. My mother sat down hard in the foyer chair. Mom, please. No. One word. Soft. Final. My grandmother continued. This morning at 8:15, I met my attorney at the Litchfield DMV branch. The room became impossibly still. My mother's face drained of color. My grandmother spoke with perfect calm. Melissa signed a notarized affidavit of forgery yesterday. Supporting documentation, including flight records, hotel confirmations, and conference registration, proved she was physically in Maine during the time this transfer supposedly occurred. My mother stared at her in horror. My grandmother continued, "The state accepted the fraud complaint this morning. I heard someone inhale sharply near the staircase. Then came the sentence that changed everything. As of 9:20 this morning, ownership of the Lexus has been legally transferred into my name pending the outcome of the investigation." My sister covered her mouth. My mother looked physically stunned. "You can't do that," she whispered weakly. "I already did." 5 words. No emotion. No hesitation. Just fact. Outside, I heard the low diesel rumble of a truck engine approaching the driveway. My grandmother didn't even glance toward the sound. Instead, she looked directly at Ryan through the open doorway where he stood frozen on the porch with his phone still pressed against his ear. "At 9:45 this morning," she said calmly. "My attorney forwarded the forged paperwork and dealership records to the Connecticut Motor Vehicle Investigations Unit. Your district manager will likely receive a call Monday morning." Ryan looked like he might faint. "I'm sorry," my grandmother added quietly, "but this violation carries consequences." He walked farther down the porch without speaking. My mother finally started crying for real then. Not the controlled version. Actual panic. "I was trying to help Ava," she sobbed. "Melissa doesn't need the car. She has everything already." And that sentence hit me harder than the forgery, because suddenly I understood something painful. My mother genuinely believed that success erased my right to fairness. If I survived without help, then she felt entitled to take from me endlessly. I spoke before I could stop myself. "Mom," I said quietly, "having a job isn't the same thing as having everything." She looked down immediately. For the first time in my life, she had no response. My grandmother finally turned toward my father. He was standing near the bookshelf with both hands in his pockets, looking exhausted and heartbroken all at once. "Daniel," she said gently, "you sent Melissa the records she needed." My father nodded once. "I noticed," my grandmother continued. "And so did your daughter." My father swallowed hard. Then, slowly, he crossed the foyer and knelt beside my mother's chair. Not to defend her, not to excuse her, just to sit beside the consequences of the woman he'd spent 34 years protecting. Outside, the flatbed truck rolled fully into the driveway. My uncle stepped out of the driver's seat and began lowering the ramp toward my Lexus. Nobody inside stopped him. Nobody argued anymore. The fight was already over. My grandmother reached into her cardigan pocket and removed the Lexus keys. The silver MP keychain flashed beneath the chandelier lights as she held them out to me. I stepped forward automatically and took them from her hand. The metal felt cold against my palm. "The SUV will stay at my house until the investigation closes," she told me gently. "Once the state issues a clean replacement title, it will return solely to your name." I nodded because suddenly I couldn't trust my voice. Then she asked me one final question. "Melissa, would you drive me home tonight?" I closed my hand around the keychain tightly enough to feel the engraved letters press into my skin. "Yes, Grandma." I drove my grandmother home that night in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. Not an angry one either. Just the kind that settles after something heavy finally breaks open and everybody is too exhausted to pretend anymore. The Lexus smelled faintly like Ava's children. Cracker crumbs sat beneath the back seat. One of Lily's tiny pink hair clips had slipped between the center console and passenger seat. I noticed all of it while driving north through the dark Connecticut roads. My grandmother sat beside me with both hands folded calmly in her lap, like she'd simply attended a normal birthday dinner, instead of dismantling an entire family structure in under an hour. About halfway to her house, she finally spoke. "Your grandfather would have been proud of you tonight." I tightened my grip slightly on the steering wheel. "I didn't really do anything." "Yes, you did," she said softly. "You stopped protecting people who were hurting you." That sentence stayed with me the rest of the drive. When we reached her farmhouse, my uncle had already parked the flatbed beside the garage. The Lexus was back where it belonged. My grandmother thanked him quietly before we walked inside together. The house felt different after everyone left. Still, peaceful, like the walls themselves had exhaled. She hung her coat carefully beside the kitchen doorway, while I stood awkwardly near the table, suddenly unsure what happened next. Then she looked at me and said something I never expected to hear from anyone in my family. "I'm sorry I waited this long." I frowned slightly. "For what?" "For seeing what your mother was doing and convincing myself it would eventually stop on its own." That hit harder than the confrontation earlier. My grandmother sat down slowly at the kitchen table and motioned for me to do the same. Your mother has been jealous of you since you were a little girl, she said quietly. I stared at her. What? She loved you, Grandma clarified immediately. But she resented you too. Those things can exist together in weak people. I didn't know what to say. So she continued. You were easier than Ava. More capable. More disciplined. Teachers praised you without effort. You solved problems quietly. Your mother admired those things in public and punished them privately. I looked down at my hands. Every childhood memory suddenly rearranged itself in my head. Every time my accomplishments became someone else's inconvenience. Every time being responsible somehow meant receiving less. We should have intervened years ago, my grandmother admitted softly. Your grandfather and I kept believing parents should handle their own children. We were wrong. I felt tears sting my eyes unexpectedly. Not because I was devastated, because someone had finally said it out loud. I wasn't imagining it. I never had been. We sat quietly for a minute while she poured tea into 2 mugs. Then she reached into her cardigan pocket and placed the silver keychain onto the table between us. The clean replacement title arrived yesterday, she said. One owner only. Melissa Parker. I picked up the keychain slowly. MP. The engraving pressed lightly into my fingertips. The investigation closes Friday, she continued. After that, the vehicle officially returns to you permanently. Thank you, I whispered. You don't thank someone for correcting a theft, she replied calmly. That line nearly broke me, because my entire life had trained me to feel guilty anytime someone treated me fairly. Before leaving that night, I finally told her something I'd been thinking about for days. I'm not spending Christmas at Mom's house this year. My grandmother nodded immediately, like she'd expected it. You'll spend it here instead. It wasn't phrased like a question. I smiled weakly. Yes. 2 weeks after the party, Ryan lost his job. The dealership terminated him after investigators reviewed the transfer paperwork and internal audit trail connected to my vehicle. His dealer license was temporarily suspended pending formal review. Ava returned the Lexus to my grandmother's garage the morning after the birthday party without speaking to me directly. A month later, she took a part-time office job in town. For the first time in her adult life, she started handling her own financial responsibilities instead of waiting for someone else to quietly absorb them. My mother called me 27 times during the first week after the party. I didn't answer. The first voicemail blamed misunderstandings. The second blamed stress. The third was just crying. I listened to all of them once and never called back. My father emailed me 9 days later. Only 3 sentences. I'm proud of you for staying calm. I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. Whenever you're ready, I'd like to take you to lunch. I still stared at that email for a long time before replying. Because forgiveness and access are not the same thing. That was another thing I finally learned. A boundary isn't hatred. It's simply deciding where someone's permission to hurt you ends. A month later, I drove the Lexus home permanently from my grandmother's house. The title sat inside the glove compartment with only my name printed on it. No shared ownership. No family umbrella policy. No hidden access. Mine. During the drive back to Hartford, the silver keychain rested against my thigh through my jeans pocket the entire way home. I kept touching it at red lights like I needed proof it was real. I still see my niece and nephew. I still love them. Children are rarely responsible for the damage adults create around them. But I no longer attend family gatherings out of obligation. I no longer volunteer to sacrifice comfort so someone else can avoid consequences. And I no longer confuse being needed with being valued. That's the difference nobody teaches the dependable daughter. People will take from you for as long as you keep handing them proof that you'll survive it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't screaming. Sometimes it's simply refusing to agree quietly anymore. That was the year my mother forged my name to steal my car. And that was the year my grandmother opened a leather binder and gave me my life back. If this story reminded you of someone who was always expected to stay quiet and understand, send it to them. Sometimes the strongest people in a family are the ones nobody protects until one person finally decides to stand beside them. And if you've ever been the daughter who handled everything while everyone else took credit for your strength, I want you to remember this. Being calm does not mean being weak, and setting boundaries does not make you cruel. Thank you for listening to Melissa's story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me the moment you realized someone in your life expected your silence more than your happiness. I'll see you in the next story.